Okay,
Life is so hard.
so you guys ready? Is this it? We got half the class here? Okay.
Lardo will be sneaking on that
Alright.
code.
So we're gonna go through some of the basic stuff for Xcode and interface builder and making a new project. It's pretty much just like a very general kind of overview of where things are. Xcode is a very sophisticated piece of software, so it's very much like Photoshop, where there's like so many bells and whistles that we don't really understand until like later on, where we're like we need that thing, and then we figure out how to do it, right? So there's just today is kind of like an intro to that, right? So sports day later, Friday is the Core Motion Hackathon. You guys already have your teams. I'm gonna do a deck of cards demo at 2 p.m. today. All right. So for the people who want to, sit in on that, we'll be in the green room most likely. And all right. So any other questions before we start the lectures, like about the assignments and stuff that you guys have been doing?
For the hackathon, the teams was what we had yesterday.
Yeah.
And what does that
Sorry.
consist of? Like, what is the hackathon again? Remind me.
Well, the hackathon is just gonna be a day of building something, and it's like in the beginning, in the morning of Friday, we'll kind of I will show you guys a little like a demo of like a starter kit for the technology that we're doing, and then I'll send you guys that code, and I'll also kind of like lay out the rules of what it is that the rules are for the judging, and then you have the rest of the day until I want to say like 4:30 to come up with something, and then at 4:30 we'll have 3 judges.
Can I
And-
not do it?
Yes, it's optional. You can, if you feel like your time is better spent, catching up or even like doing stuff ahead, then that's your choice.
But you would say that the hackathon is valuable. And
Hackathon is something that, for the people who did it before, they ended up learning a lot, and it was really fun for them, and it was a good experience. And also the winners for hackathons gets like a little present from me, right? So extra incentive. But the team fatal error has a extra point.
Yeah, I think fatal error is definitely great. We also have Pradeep.
That's
so.
only if Pradeep comes in during Friday.
Yeah.
The meta.
All right, so any other questions? No, we're good? All right, let's get this started. Hopefully we can end before 11. All right, so I'm just going to quickly go through this little list here I've compiled, right? We're not going to dwell on anything too much. If you guys have questions along the way, just feel free to stop me, all right? So we're going to create a new Xcode project.
And is this going to be recorded?
It is recorded.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
it's being recorded now.
Okay.
So, and you guys will also get this PDF later. Okay, so we're going to create a project, and you open Xcode, you select get started with an Xcode project. We're always going to select single view application. There's these other kinds of templates that you can select to start with, but really all it is just gives you some pre-written code that you can add in yourself later, or delete if you want. Single page application is the easiest, like the most basic one, so we just stick with that. None of these are like forever. If you select one by mistake, you can always like just delete some of the code that they gave you to make it a single page application. So really these are just like beginning templates, right? So for everything that we're going to do here in our class, we're just going to stick with the single view application, right? We click next. We give it a name. Let's say Tuesday, May lecture.
Today's Wednesday.
Oh,
Wednesday,
it's
but
Wednesday.
no big deal.
Okay. Well, we'll just say May 10 lecture. Okay. So over here, you have all of your stuff. It's going to be auto-completed if you're already signed in with your Apple account. The language we're going to use is always going to be Swift. Devices, you can select Universal, right? Or if you just want iPhone or iPad, you can change that here. Over here, there's Objective-C, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do Swift. These 3 checkboxes, right? So I want to quickly go over what these do. Right now, for this week, don't check any of these boxes. If you check the boxes, it'll just generate some files for you and generate some code for you, right? That you're not going to use right now, right? If you check this, it's going to build some core data stuff. We'll get into that next week. These 2 are about unit tests, like test-driven development stuff, which we're not going to cover here as well. So you'll never have to check these two things. If you do check it, no big deal. It'll just give you a bunch of extra folders that you're not going to use. Okay, so we're not checking any of these. We're gonna select next. It tells you where to save, right? You show it where you want to save it. Also, if you check this box here, it'll create a Git repository on your computer. It's the same thing as if you opened the file in your terminal and did git init. It just initializes empty Git repository. And generally speaking, you always want to check this box. There's no harm in doing that. I'll show you guys how to use Git with Xcode. It's really, really convenient. All right, so I'm going to check this box because I'm going to use Git. I'm going to create. So now over here, you see we have a project. All right, all of this stuff is kind of like the general kind of the info for it. Don't worry too much about this now. It's a bunch of like different selections over here. So we have.
Did you just start it?
Yeah, it's recorded.
Oh, okay.
So we have portrait, landscape. If you want to not have it be able to rotate, then you just uncheck these boxes here. All right, and that's the main thing. So once we've created our projects, we're going to go in here and we're going to see, well, first of all, we see that this is Xcode, right? So in Xcode, we have a bunch of these different sections, right? And I'm going to go over each one of these guys, right? So we're on to this tour of Xcode part. So the toolbar is this top bar up here. This is where you have your, minimize and close the windows. You have your play button if you want to start your simulation. Over here, you can select which device you want to simulate it on, or if you want to simulate it on a phone that you plugged in. Right now, my phone is plugged in, so you see my device is here. It shows, right? If you want to simulate it on an iPhone 7 Plus, you can select that. And the left side here is the project that you're going to simulate. Right now, we only have one project. If in the future you have other frameworks that you add on to your project, there's going to be some other different selections. But generally, by default, it'll always just be the project that you're looking at. Okay, so we're going to go into this a little bit more when we do the simulator part later. Over here, there's these three little selections. This one is just the basic one where you see everything as it is now. Over here is the assistant editor, right? Is where you have the two things side by side. Close that. Over here is like a code kind of comparison. It's like a version editor, right? Very rarely you'll use this one, but this you'll use a lot. These things on the side over here. So these little panels on the side will hide or show any of the things, the different sections, right? So sometimes if your screen is small, you want better real estate, you'll hide all the side panels and you only have the main one, right? So over here, these are what the buttons do, right? So moving on, Navigator is this part, right? This left side. You can hide that and show it. It's always going to be on the left. You have like your little project overview here. You can go into the different files, go into the storyboard, the app delegate, the assets, and this is where you would drag your images if you have images and stuff. We'll get into that a little bit later, not today. But over here, we have a bunch of selections on top over here. You're not really going to use them a lot other than when it's running and you want to debug it, right? So for now, stick with the first one, the folder structure one, and this is the part where 90% of the time you're going to use this panel here. So Navigator, jump bar. Okay, I want to show you guys. If you click on, so this is what the jump bar is. This part here, it's like a little list of the directories you're in, and depending on what you want to click, you can navigate to that using the jump bar. Let's say I want to navigate to View Controller. And this jump bar is especially useful if you have the assistant editor up. So if I have the assistant editor up, there's two sides, right? This one is this code, and let's say I want this one to be my storyboard. I use the jump bar to navigate to the storyboard. So now I have the storyboard here, and I can connect stuff from the storyboard to the code. Right? So that's using the jump bar. Another thing you can do in the jump bar is also look at all of the different functions in this drop down. right? So if you have a million functions, it's easy for you to navigate. And I'll show you guys how to create marks in your code later when we get into the documentation part, right? But this is the jump bar. You can use that to navigate to different areas of your project. Okay, so we got the utility area. Utility area is this part, the right part. You can hide that and show that with the side panel here. The utility area will show different things based on what you're looking at. If you're looking at a view controller with some Swift code, it's going to give you this part. We're not, like, when we're doing Swift programming and we're looking at this text editor here, very rarely will we need this utility area. It's mainly used when we're in the storyboard. So if we're in the storyboard, we can click on the thing and then it'll show us on this side, and it has all of these nifty little icons on top. And we'll get into, well, just as an overview, don't feel stressed that you have to memorize all this right now. You're going to get used to it as you work with it, okay? So this one, the first two, I've never really even used. I'm not exactly sure. They're just like giving you some info. This one is where you want to define what class different elements are. So if you select an element, like this case, I'll select this view controller here, this view controller. I can say, hey, I want your class to be, maybe something else, right? So that's where we can assign that with this little flag icon up here, right? We can also give it a storyboard ID, and this will be useful later on when you have multiple, scenes that you want to kind of transition to. Give them an ID so you can go to that place, right? This one, the one with the little arrow pointing down, this is the one where it gives you all of your styles, right? So let's say that we have, and we'll get into this object library in a minute here in the basic UI elements part, but let's say that we want to create a view, right? I'm going to type view down here in this object library. I can drag it into my storyboard, right? We have these handy little blue lines that is kind of like the Apple's guidelines of where things should be. We snap it in place, and we notice that this little arrow panel here now has a bunch of styling selections. So we can say, hey, background, I want you to be purple, so we can see it, right? So we can give it some styles. So basically what it is each of these elements, including the view controller and everything you see here, is an object. It's an object of a specific type. So if we look at this view here and we go to the type thing, you'll see that the class is a UI view, right? You can make your own custom, whatever view you want, but by default it's going to be a UI view, and it's an object, right? It's an object that has a class. So what do all objects have?
Properties?
Yeah, they have properties or attributes, right? So these things here are just the attributes. So it has an attribute of .background color, and here we're just setting it to purple. Anything we can do on this side over here, we can do it in the code. We can just access that property and set the thing in the code.
So we don't have to CSS.
Don't have to CSS, no. So
This is basically like the same thing as if you were doing Keynote, right? Like designing stuff in Keynote.
pretty much. I mean, this, back in the day, I want to say before 2010, they didn't even have a storyboard. Like, they didn't have this. All you did was through the code here. And you have to define, make a view, put it in this coordinate, and then make it this shape. So all of this stuff is really extra, right? It's really useful.
They didn't have a lot before 2010 anyway.
Yeah.
With iPhones.
So everything you do here, it just makes it easier for you to kind of set the kind of overall shape. If you want to be more specific and change things as the app is running, then you do it with the code, right? So yeah, so this is the arrow thing is always going to be, have stuff to do with styling. There's also this button here, this is not on the platform, but if you unclick the installed, it'll kind of just hide it, and you'll see that it's kind of like opaque, right? It's if you have a bunch of elements and you're doing some testing on some other part, you want to kind of temporarily hide it, you can uninstall it like that, right? Okay, so moving on over here, the ruler one, this has to do with the constraints, right? And we'll get into constraints a little bit later. This one has to do with the outlets and the connections right? And we'll get into that later. But those are what these two are, right? So these 4 are what you're going to be using the most. And they only appear if you're looking at storyboard, okay? Okay, so editor area is just, if you're looking at some Swift code, this is the editor area, right? So nothing special about that. You can get the cold folding, I can't say that, and then line numbers. You can also add breakpoints. If you click on the line number, this adds a breakpoint. If you run it, it'll just stop right there, and you can do some debugging. You can like go line by line down. In order to delete the breakpoint, you just drag it out, and then there's like a little sound effect and a little animation like that. All right. So okay. In the past, I've had students be like, "Oh my God, my thing is broken," and then I look at it, it's like there's a breakpoint there. So okay, so that debug area is this part down here. Right? You can also hide this and show this over here. This part is for when you're debugging. This part is similar to your console when you're doing it'll whenever you print something, it'll print out in this console here, right? And it also displays some warnings and messages, error messages. If you crash, this will be the part you want to look at for why it crashed.
Why can't all languages be this user friendly?
Well, yeah, Xcode it's pretty sophisticated. It's gone through many versions. So Xcode 8. So that means there must be like a 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 8. Okay, so getting into basic UI elements. If we look at, I'm gonna hide those 2 panels, right? This side panel here, if you click on anything, it'll show you, it'll kind of highlight that thing in this side, little panel here. You can hide that by going down here, right? If you want extra space to look at your storyboard, you can, there's like a little plus minus down here where you can kind of zoom in or zoom out. Also, this part is new for Xcode 8. In the platform, sometimes you'll see that in the videos, they'll have like a square kind of thing. That's because the videos were taken before Xcode 8. And before Xcode 8, you had to build everything in a square so that no matter what screen size happens, it just becomes responsive. But that was really annoying because nobody has a square phone, right? So in Xcode 8, they give you this ability to view as different things.
That's so cool.
So if I want to view it as an iPad,
That's awesome.
yeah. So you can just quickly preview how it looks like, landscape, portrait, like that. The thing about this though is that it's not as robust as if you did it in a simulator, right? Because it's not running the code. So sometimes you'll have responsive stuff to say, if I detect my phone is rotating like that, make these changes. This will not do that detection because the code isn't running. It's just like a very simple kind of preview.
So if you change, like if you can go to the iPad one real quick.
Yeah.
So obviously that one looks very different from the phone. If
Yeah.
you were to change it here in the iPad, that would change it in all the views, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you can't make specific changes based on how big or like what device you're working with.
You cannot do that in the storyboard. You can do that in code. Yeah. So you can say in your code, you can write some logic to say, hey, if the width is greater than this, make these changes.
Okay.
So it's kind of like responsive design.
Mhm.
But in general, you'll be doing it on the storyboard using auto layouts. And I'll show you auto layout stuff later.
So should we start with just the iPhone then, and then
Yeah.
make the changes?
Just
for
start with the
everything
iPhone 7. That's like the default one that'll give you. Okay. Okay. Another question.
Yeah, so when you code for iPhone 7, do you have to code separately or
No.
for
Everything's
iPad?
universal.
Okay.
Yeah. Everything. It's surprisingly, everything you build on the phone, it works for iPads. Yeah,
Really?
it's really nice. Yeah. Okay, so basic UI elements, all right? Object library. If you click on your storyboard, click on your view controller, you get your object library down here. You can see each of these things are kind of like a UI element. Each of these things you can drag onto your storyboard. They're all different types of objects, right? Hence the object library. If you want to look for a particular one, you just search it down here. Like I searched view, so I found view right here, right? So we dragged it over here, and notice that when we first dragged it over here, we had these blue guidelines, right? These are not constraints. They're just more or less like Apple's kind of suggestion for where you should put things. They're kind of convenient, right? So my recommendation is when you drag things on for the first time, just follow the blue guidelines so it'll be kind of where it needs to be in the beginning. It'll make it easier for you when you add the constraints later on. Okay, so labels. If I want to add a label, I type in label. Label is kind of like it's like a container for some text. All right, let's say I want my label to be like here, like that. Okay, I can give it some styles. I can say, hey, I want your background color to be gray, and I want you to be centered. I want your text to be, hello world. Right? It's a label. It's a container for some text.
Put that on top of the view.
You can put it in the view. And notice over here, we have our view, and then our label is in the view. Right? If we want to put it out, we just drag it out. So it's side by side now. We can put it in the view as well, so it's in the view. Right? So now this guy is nested within that view. And views are kind of like divs. Right? We use them to kind of like contain a bunch of stuff. And it's easier for us if we, for some reason, wanted to hide everything in this view, we can just hide this view, and we don't have to hide every single thing in the view, right? So yeah, we can make this label. Let's make it, the full width of the view. We can say we want your background color to be transparent. There we go. And we can say, hey, we want your color to be white. We can increase the font size if we want. We can also change the font. Over here, you click on the little text thing. You will select custom. And then over here, you have a family that you can select. I like to use this one, Futura. And then you can increase the size.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So all of this is done. You can do all this in the code as well, right? So over here, you have a bunch of stuff that you can play around with that will give you the style that you want, right?
Does the storyboard translate over into the code, or do we have to actually type in everything that we do?
So everything that you do on the storyboard is kind of isolated from your code. So those are two separate things, right? The code doesn't know what's happening in the storyboard. And, it only gets combined as you run it. So when you first run your application, everything in the storyboard kind of compiles down and it gets put in the code, and then the code will have that as like an initial setting. If you want to change it back, if you change the styles via code and you want to change it back to this original setting that you defined in the storyboard, that's not possible. You have to do it programmatically, right? So it's not interconnected, right? It's really just like an initial setup. Yeah. So, and I'll show you guys how to connect it with the code later on. Yep.
Okay. So when you code, would you code it in CSS then? If you're making changes?
No,
or
you code in Swift.
in Swift?
Yes. The only language we ever use here is Swift.
Okay.
Okay, so different objects. We got labels, which are pretty much for text. We have buttons, right? These are the most basic ones, right? We have a button, let's say down here. Let's say we want your background color. It's this one. Want it to be gray so we can see it, right? Buttons down here. We also have views, which I already showed you guys, right? We got this view over here, button over here. So everything on the side here is just a kind of like a list representation of what's on your actual storyboard. I like to deal with, if I want to select something, I would definitely try to select it on the left here rather than on here, because things can overlap and it's very like ambiguous what you're selecting. All right, so if I want to select this button, I'll click on that. Select this view, I click on that, right? So there's a lot more, objects down here, and you'll get to know, you'll use some of them throughout the course of this stack. Okay, but these are the most basic ones that you're going to need for this week. Okay, so let's take a look at the simulator. All right, now that we have this little thing going on here, if we want to run it on the simulator, we can select which device we want to simulate it on. Let's say iPhone 7 Plus. Click play. It'll run the code, and then it'll build the code and it'll run it on the simulator. Right? So you'll see that this guy popped up, the simulator thing, and look at that. it's like super huge, right? It's loading. It's basically loading as if it were a brand new phone, right? So we see that it loaded, it went into our app, and it looks all weird, right? The reason why it looks all weird, one is because this is way too big. If we want to, minimize this, we go over to the window on top, click scale, we say 50%, still too big. Scale 33%, there we go. This looks like a good scale, right? So it looks a little weird because over here we're building it on iPhone 7. This one is iPhone 7 Plus, and there are no constraints. That's why it's kind of like just freeform. Okay, so I just want to quickly show you guys what you can do with the simulator though. So let's say we have this simulator over here. You can do the window size, which is window scale, right over here. There's also the hardware buttons. So let's say I wanted to do a shake gesture for this phone. I can click on simulator, hardware, and I can do shake gesture. Or I can do rotate left, rotate right to get it back. I can also, there's also like home button, touch ID, there's a bunch of stuff as if you had it on your physical device. So you can do those hardware kind of like button interactions, right? So there's also, this one is pretty important as well. Later on, it's not going to be super important now, but if you have animations, you can click on debug and select slow animations, and everything will go really slowly so you can really see how it transitions, right? So notice that this button, when I click on it, it kind of goes, opaque for a bit and then it comes back. Notice that how it's really slow, but if I turn off slow animations, it just goes by really quickly, see? So it's for debugging. Those are some of the things I want to show you guys with the simulator. Okay, so now let's take a look at auto layout. All right, auto layout, different ways, editing, deleting. Okay, so let's maximize this guy. We're gonna stop the simulation, right? And we're gonna, look at that. They had something in our log over here. So we're gonna minimize this one. So we have everything here. Everything's on our storyboard. And we wanna add some constraints so it knows where it needs to be regardless of what device or what size the screen is, right? So the way you add auto layout constraints is the first thing you want to do is you want to think about what is the minimum number of constraints for me to unambiguously tell the phone or the computer where this element needs to be at all times, right? So if I pin it to the top, right, then it knows it cannot be anywhere else except for the top. But then it's ambiguous whether it should be left and right. Right? So then I have to give it like a left, right? If I do that, then it'll be pinned to the left, pinned to the top, but then it can also be like really long or really wide, right? And then if I give it a height and a width, then it's always going to be fixed. There's no ambiguity, right? So the thing is, you don't want the computer to kind of assume or like, to kind of, eyeball where it needs to be. It needs to know exactly where it needs to be so that it's fully constrained, right? Regardless of what device. So in this case, I have this view over here, or in this case, let's say I have this label in this view. I want this label to be pinned to the edges of the view, right? So I can select the label, and there's many different ways you can do this. First step always involves selecting the thing, right? So I select the label, select it. I can go down here to the little TIE Fighter thingy, and I'm gonna click on that, and over here I can add the constraints that I want, right? So let's say I'm pinning it to the top, left, right, and bottom, right? So in order to add the constraints, all I need to do is just click on that. Each one of these has a little drop down, and you can see from the drop down what is it relative to. So in this case, it's relative to this view. That's good, right? And normally it'll be relative to the thing that its parent that is in, right? So we have these 4 constraints. We click on add the 4 constraints, and there we go. Our label is now fully constrained. You see that it's kind of red because this view is not constrained. Right? The view needs to be fully constrained in order for this label to know exactly where it needs to be. So, question?
Yeah, so if you were to constrain the view, that does not automatically constrain everything within the view.
No. Everything in the view needs to know where it needs to be relative to that view. Is it to the left side, top edge, or is it, it needs to know. So the view, we need to constrain it. So we do the same thing. We select the view, we go down here, we click on top, left, right, and let's say we want to give it a height. Right? We can also pin it to the bottom, but then you see that, it'll be from the button, right? We can also make it distance to the whole view, the main view, right here. That'll be 511, or, we can have it to the bottom layout guide, which is also 511. So the idea is that you can select what you want it to be relative to. In this case, I don't want this guy. I don't want to pin it to any bottom. I just want to give it a height. Then it knows exactly where it needs to be, right? So the width will kind of change based on what device you're using, because it's always pinned to the edge. Edge of the device changes, the width will change. It'll stretch, right? Question?
Will that apply to the text as well? Will it make it bigger or smaller?
No.
No, you
No.
can do that separately? Or
Yes.
You can't do that?
Auto layout constraints have nothing to do with properties of the objects. I'm not going to change your color or anything like that. So I'm going to add these 4 constraints over here, right? And boom, there we go. Everything's blue, right? There's no errors, no warnings, so everything is good in terms of this guy. Now, this guy doesn't have any constraints, right? I'm going to show you another way to add constraints, right? So if you put your mouse on this thing that you want to constrain and you press down Control, you can drag it to whatever you want it, to constrain it to. Right? So let's say I don't want to drag it relative to anything, and I let go. I can set the width, height, aspect ratio. This has to do with relative to itself, right? So if I Control drag and just let go here, I can give it a width and height aspect ratio. If I Control drag to this, I can set the distance from that. I can set the distance from, well, let's put this back. Distance from the bottom here, let's say vertical spacing to the bottom. There we go, look at that. We can also set the leading space to this container. We can also set this one. But right now, notice that I gave it 2 constraints, bottom and then left, right? It's telling me that, hey, look at this little dotted thing here. This is the minimum space it needs to display this button. Now, if I want it to be like this, I have to give it another constraint. But right now, it's kind of like, okay, I'm good, right? If your button has like some text, it'll calculate how much space that text takes, and it'll give you like the minimum, right? And sometimes you'll see that these orange lines doesn't mean that there's an error. All it means is that right now, visually, it's here, but your constraints tell me that I need to be somewhere else, right? And the way you fix this is you press Option, Command, hold them down, and you press equal sign. And then it'll just go to the place that it needs to be, that it thinks it should be, right? So right now this button has these 2 constraints. So right now it's good. It has all the constraints it needs. But if I wanted to actually look like the thing that I drew up, then I'm gonna have to give it a constraint over here, and also maybe a height, right? Like that, right? So once we have these constraints, we go over to this little ruler thing, and we can see all of the constraints that we just set. Let's say I want the height to be 100. I'll just set 100 over here, press Enter, and it's 100. Right, so we can edit those constraints over here on the left side, or the right side. Same thing for any element, okay? Okay, another thing you can also do, let's say I delete all of my constraints over here. I'm just holding down Command to highlight all of them, and I press Delete. I can delete all of the constraints. So the button now, oh, did I delete the constraints for this guy? Oh, I deleted the constraint for this, the label. So label no longer has any constraints. If I want to set constraints, another way I can do it is over here on the left. So if I hold down Control from the label to the view, I can say I want your leading space to be that. I want your trailing space to be that. I want your top space, and then bottom space. right? But now look at this, the bottom space is 91.5. If I want the bottom space to be 0, I just do that, and now it's 0. All right? So I gave it the same constraints as I did when I did this thing over here, but I just dragged and dropped it. All right? In addition to let's say have view, in addition to the the trailing and the leading stuff, I can also tell something to be centered or vertically or horizontally aligned, right? And the way you do that is just control. Let's give this guy color first. Say make it red. Let's say I want you to be centered horizontally in the container, centered centered vertically in container. So now it's always aligned. But right now it's missing some constraints because it doesn't know how big it needs to be. So I need to give it width and a height. Then it knows exactly where it needs to be. Okay? So depending on what device I use, it'll always be centered in the middle and be that width and height. Right? So right now everything knows where it needs to be. Right? Regardless of if I like make it landscape or portrait, it's just gonna follow the constraints that I laid out. Right? So it doesn't need to assume anything. Okay, so now if we run this, it should look a lot better. In the beginning, students always have a tough time with auto layouts. A lot of the times you'll do a bunch of auto layouts and then you'll get confused, and it's like there's like a million things here. It's easier for me to just delete all of them and start over. A lot of the time it's like that, right? So common mistakes are just like over constraining something, telling it to be here, and then also be that width, and then if it changes, then there's like these two conflicting constraints. Which one do you want, right? So the computer will kind of like they'll have like a priority that's like there's some kind of rule they follow, but it'll show you in the log that there's like conflicting constraints. I'm just gonna assume that you don't want that one. Right? Okay, so it looks good. If I flip this guy, it's gonna look the same. Oh, you know what? It didn't do the responsive thing because I disabled the landscape mode. So check this out. If I go back and I enable landscape mode and I run it again, now if I flip it, it'll actually flip over, be responsive. Look at that. Right? So it's like now it works when you flip it over because you're enabling that, right? Okay. Again, okay. So that's what we got for auto layouts. Stack views. All right, we're just gonna go by really quickly with these stack views. All right. So a stack view is nothing more than a kind of container to aid you in making some kind of uniform grid. Okay. Before stack views, if I wanted to make a grid like tic-tac-toe or a calculator, I have to like put in each of the things and give each of them constraints, make sure they're all equal, not very responsive. I have to do a bunch of code to make it all equal and responsive. So with a stack view, it's a special container to make these grids really easy. And they're mainly used just for like the purposes of making things uniform. Okay. So if you're not using a grid, there's no reason for you to do anything with stack views, right? Because stack views make it easier for you to create grids. So let's say we want to make like a little keypad here for tic-tac-toe. All right, so the first thing I need is I'm gonna need this vertical stack view, right? And the vertical stack view just means that everything inside of this stack view now is gonna have a vertical stack to it, right? And I'll show you guys that in a minute. So here we have this vertical stack view. I'm just gonna say, hey, you're gonna be relative to this view here, you're gonna have a vertical space of that much. You're gonna be pinned to the sides, and you're gonna have aspect ratio of 1:1. Okay, so right now the aspect ratio is 343 to 269, which is not what I want. So I can select I want you to be 1:1, so that it's always square. Okay, so this is my stack view. In my stack view, I can put other things, including other stack views. Right, so I put 3 horizontal stack views in here. Right, that's one. You see on the left hand side, right? It automatically filled up the whole area. If I put another one in here, it just put it in the other horizontal stack view, which is not what I want. I want it to be in the vertical one, right? So they're together. And the thing that I like to do is I don't like dragging it to my storyboard. I like dragging elements to this side panel here so I can put it exactly where I want it to be, right? So it's not confusing, you know, because it's all overlapping, right? So over here I have this one vertical stack view with 3 horizontal stack views inside of it, but notice that it's all like kind of like they're not the same, right? So in order for me to have a uniform kind of distribution, I select the stack view, I go over here and I select distribution, fill equally, right? So now if I look at these 3, they're equally filled, right? So similarly, I want to do that for all of these guys as well. If they're the same object, you can select multiple ones and just edit them all at on one time. All right, fill equally. There we go. So now, let's say that I have a button. All right, put a button inside of this stack view, and let's give this button a background color blue. Right, and we're gonna make you text color white. Okay, close that. Now, if I drag another button down, it's gonna fill equally, right? Another one, it's gonna fill equally. Now, I can highlight both of these guys, and I can say text color white, background color blue. There we go. Right? Now, these 3 buttons are in the stack view, this horizontal stack view. That's why I stacked up horizontally, right? So I still need to do that for these 2, right? In order to make my grid complete. But let me show you guys something really crazy, right? I'm gonna delete these 2 stack views, right? And check this out. If I select the thing and I press Option or Alt and I drag down, look at that. Boom, it's made a copy. Boom. See? So now we have our grid. Everything is we have these 3 horizontal stack views that have all of these buttons in there. And if I want to give the stack view some spacing, I will select the stack view, go over here to spacing, and then just give it, maybe 5 pixels space. Right? Same thing for these 3. Because they're the same, I can highlight all of them, and then just give them spacing all 5. Right? So there you go, you have your little keypad here, right? So for tic-tac-toe and for the tipster one, you're gonna need this, right? So stack views, notice how quickly it was for me to just build that. If there were no stack views, it would take me at least 15 minutes to do all of the constraints, and still it wouldn't be very responsive, right? So stack views are really useful for that. Let's take a look at what else we got. Okay, intro to view controllers. Okay, first thing I wanna show you guys is what the root view controller is. All it is that this arrow, whatever this arrow points to, is going to be the view that loads when the app first loads, right? If you take away this, then if I do the simulator, it's going to be all black. There's nothing that loads because there's no arrow, right? If I took away the arrow by mistake, what do I do? I select the view controller, and I select is initial view controller. Check that box, it'll come back. Okay, you can only have one root view controller, and this is the one you want. All right. So let's take a look at making a custom view controller, a UI view controller subclass. Okay, let's say that I want this guy to be my special view controller. Right here, when you create the project, they give you this vanilla one. What we want to do is make it our own, right? So we can rename this. Let's say main view controller, right? And we also named this main view controller, and maybe up here in the comments as well, main view controller. And notice that now this is a special subclass of a UI view controller. The other one was as well, but the name was very kind of ambiguous, right? View controller. That's not very explicit. We want to name these things, you know, whatever the function of our storyboard scene is, right? So for this guy, we named it main view controller. If we press Command S, we can save it, right? It's gonna save anyway. Okay, so now if we go to the main storyboard, notice that when I hover over this little yellow icon for the view controller, it's telling me, hey, I am of class view controller. If I want to make this guy the class that I just created, the custom one, I just go over here to the little flag thingy and I select main view controller. And it's going to be in here because you saved it, right? So now this guy is a main view controller, which is this guy, right? So then they can be connected together. Okay, so, okay. Creating custom view controller, subclass, assigning classes to the storyboard. I just showed you guys that, right? You can do that not only with view controllers, but with anything. Let's say I have this label here and I want to make my own subclass of some label. I just go over here and I give it that subclass, right? Same thing. UI lifecycle. Okay, so this one is pretty important. All right, I want to go over quickly. You know, you'll have access to this little diagram later on. But the idea is that throughout the life cycle of your scene, it's going to have like a process of appearing, loading, appearing, you know, did appear, will appear, did disappear, will disappear, you know, as this list, you know, kind of hints, right? So each of these things is called a UI lifecycle event. And inside of our code, we can tap into those events and do stuff during those events, right? So this is the default things that they give you. View did load, right? Do any additional setup after loading the view. You know, you can give it some styles, you can run a function, you can do different things. But the idea is that this function will run during that event. This one, the memory warning one, is just, you know, it's default, it's always there. I've never used it personally, but what it's used for is that if there's a memory overload or if you're using too much memory, the phone's going to crash, this function will run, and in that function you're going to specify, you know, get rid of this array, get rid of that object to clear up memory, right? Okay, so in addition to view did load, if you just type view, you'll see that there's a list of things down here. So you got view did appear, view will appear, you know, a bunch of stuff. So these will all be auto-completed for you if you type in view, and you can select, you know, target any of these events, right? So just a heads up on that. Okay, so let's take a look at organizing code. Okay, this is a pretty big one that I like to emphasize this in the beginning when you guys are still kind of, you know, rookies and not have the chance to build bad habits, right? I want to give you guys the opportunity to start building good habits. Okay, so documentation is very important. Documenting your code, right? So, you know, when we write our code, we want everything to be very clear and concise. But also, we want, if it gets convoluted and there are like thousands of lines, we want to be able to organize them in a way that makes it easier for us and other people to maintain it, right? So if I have 10,000 functions, I can find all of those 10,000 functions in this dropdown, but it's going to be really confusing for me to sort through 10,000 of these, right? So what I can do is I can do this. This is a comment, right? I write whatever it is, my comment in here, it'll show up in green. But if I do dash dash, capital M-A-R-K, I can make a mark, right? And this mark, I can name it, you know, UI, or I can do this, mark UI lifecycle, and maybe give it like, you know, like a little dash here so we can see it. And now, check it out. We got this mark in our code. So we can separate all of our important things into different chunks, right? So the thing I want to do, and I'll show you guys after we're done with all of this, I'll show you guys the code I'm actually using now, I'm building this algo app. And in that algo app, there's like thousands and thousands of lines of code.
So if you don't have the mark, if you don't have that word mark, it won't show up.
Yeah. If you don't have mark, if you're like that, then it won't show up in here, right? So only will the mark show up.
Mark followed with the colon.
Yes, mark and colon.
But it has to be space, right? Or no?
Well, I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, still works. Right. So mark colon. Anything after that is going to be showing up here. Okay. And I'll show you guys my project later on. It's gonna blow your mind. It's really crazy. All right. So drop down menu, line numbers, code folding. You guys did that already. Mark. Connecting storyboard with the view controller. All right, outlets, actions, outlet collections. All right, this is the last bit we're gonna do. All right, so we're gonna pull up the assistant editor. We're gonna minimize all of these panels here. We're gonna select our storyboard so we have it side by side. Personally, I like to have my storyboard on the right side and my code on the left, because when I drag things from the storyboard to the code, I'm not doing it from this picture, I'm doing it from this little menu here to be more accurate, right? So if I wanted to make an outlet for this view, I would select the view, hold down Control, and just drag it in. And here it is, it's an outlet, right? There's also outlet collection, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And I'm gonna name this, top label. Usually you wanna name it something very explicit, right? The type is a UI view, and that's good. It's a weak storage type. And the difference between strong and weak is that weak storage types will get deallocated if the view is no longer visible, right? So 99.9% of the time, you're gonna use weak. I've never run into a situation where I need to use strong, right? So just stay with the weak, but the difference is that the strong ones will always be there in memory, hogging your memory, because they're important, right? So for outlets, we're just gonna make it weak, connect, and look at that. We got this outlet here. Over here on the left hand side, we have this little circle. You see that the circle is full. There's something, it's like filled up. That means it's connected to something inside of our storyboard, right? So this guy is connected. And if we go over to the top label over here and we go to this little arrow, avatar arrow thingy, we'll see that, hey, we have this connection, right? So if we delete this from our code, we click on top label, it's still there, right? Just because we deleted it in our code doesn't mean it gets deleted in our storyboard. And if we run this now, it'll crash because it says, hey, you have this thing that's connected, but I can't find it on code, crash, right? So if you delete something here, you must do the counterpart of deleting it here as well, right? With the X over here, right? So that's just something, you'll see it in one of the videos. I believe one of the guys were like, this almost made me quit being an iOS developer because I couldn't figure out why it was crashing. That was why it was crashing. It's like a really dumb mistake, right? But just so you guys know, that will happen. So I want to talk about actions or IB actions. Only buttons will allow you to have IB actions, right? So I'm going to select this button here. I'm going to drag it in. We're going to select action. And we have this extra selection of action because it is a button, right? So we're going to name this handle button pressed, right? And I'm gonna say handle reset button pressed. Okay, and we're gonna say UI button touch up inside. There's also other different actions, events that you can do. Touch up inside just means it's touching up and you went touching down and went up while it's still in the box. If you touch down and you go up outside of it, it's not a touch up inside. So how many times have you tried to send a message and then you're like, oh no, maybe I shouldn't send that, right? So it's like, that's not a touch up inside. Okay, so cool. Connect that. Boom, we have this action here. You'll notice that it's a function. Anything in this function will run when the button is clicked, right? So here I can say print button clicked, like that. And if I run this, click on it, look at that, button clicked, boom. Keep on clicking it, it'll keep on showing up, right? So the prints will show up in your console here on the bottom. Okay, so I'm gonna make this a reset button, all right? So I'm gonna name this reset, okay? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, if I click on some button, I'm gonna turn it red. Okay, so in order for me to do that, I'm going to have to make another action for each of these buttons, right? So making another action. And I'm going to say make button red, okay? And we're going to sender as a UI button, touch up inside. Good. So here, I'm going to write some code to say sender, which is the button that I clicked on, sender dot background color equals to UI color dot red. Okay. So now let's run this. If we click on this button on the top right here, it should turn red.
So that only applies to that button. You have to do individually for each button.
Correct. Boom, turn red. Okay, none of these work because only this guy is hooked up to that. But what I can do, I don't need to make other outlets. I can just drag these other buttons into the same outlet like that. So all of these buttons will turn red. They'll all run that function, but depending on which button actually invoked that function, it'll change that specific button to red, and that guy is the sender, right? It's very much like jQuery, where you have a this dot something,
What if you want to reverse it? You pressed it by accident or dragged it by accident.
And I'll show you guys that later. Okay, so now let's make sure that this works. Right? Good. It works. Click on it, it's red. Click on it again, it's still going to be red. Right? We don't have a conditional to say, hey, if it's red, turn it blue. If it's blue, turn it red. We could do that in the logic, right? But what I'm going to do here, I want to do, when I click on reset, I want these guys all to be back to blue. Okay? Now, there's the brute force way. There's also the outlet collection way, which is the more elegant way. Right? So I'm going to demonstrate how outlet collections work, and hopefully, you'll be able to implement this later on. So I want to make, in order for me to change the style of these buttons, I need to be able to access them. Right? It's very similar to CSS. If I want to give some tag, some style, I need to be able to access that tag via a class or an ID or something, right? So outlets are those accessors, right? So if it doesn't have an outlet, I can't target it. So what I'm going to do for this button, I'm going to make an outlet, but I'm going to actually make an outlet collection, right? And we'll see. This is a grid button. Grid button is a UI button. Boom. Notice that for the outlet collection, it's an array of UI buttons, right? So I can now drag all of these guys to that array as well, and they're just going to get added into the array. Obviously, they have to all be of the same type, right? So instead of making a different outlet for each of these buttons, I'm making one outlet collection for all of them. And the reason I can do that is because I want everything to be the same. If I want to have differences, then it's very difficult. I need to make a separate one for that button. If I want this one button to turn green or something. But the idea is that I want every single button to be back to blue. Right? So I have this outlet button for outlet collection for all these buttons. When the reset button is clicked, I want to make every button blue, right? And I do that by iterating over the outlet collection. Because it's an array, I can iterate through it. So for btn in grid button, btn dot background color equals to UI color dot blue, right? So I'm iterating through it, and each time I'm just setting whatever the iteration is to the blue color, right? So stop this, run it. Every time you run it, you always want to stop it first before you run, even though it'll work if you just click on run, but there are known issues that it might break your Xcode if you do that. Okay, so we're making these guys red. We click on reset, boom, they're blue again. Or they're this type of blue now, right? Because we set it programmatically, right? There's also different ways you can make specific hex colors. That's just like one Stack Overflow search away. Very easy to do. But the idea is now I've iterated through this array, and I can set properties with an outlet collection, and that's really all the outlet collection is good for. Yeah.
So you're dragging the buttons into that table. Is there visual code representation that all those are in the array now? Because right now, what if you accidentally skip one and you don't catch it, how would you know?
You
that
would
it's
know
not?
by looking at the button and going over here to see if it's in that outlet collection.
So there's no actual Swift like code representation on the left side that it's actually in there.
There is there's a thing, I think you can go to your storyboard. Let's just close this. So the question was, if I have these connections with my button, I can see it over here, but is there like a code way I can see it, right? So if you go to storyboard over here, you can right click on it. You can open as source code. That'll give you all of the crazy source code that looks like HTML, right? But you know, I'm not exactly sure if the connections are visible in here, but this is like the code that gets run when the app gets run, right? So I actually, sometimes when you're having errors, you might want to open this and find things in here. You know, that actually solved one of my problems earlier.
Can you edit it from here?
Yeah.
Or is this just a view?
You can. Before there was an interface builder, you had to literally write out this everything without a visual kind of way to do it. Yeah. So that's why the apps in the beginning, when the iPhone first came out, were all like really ugly and simple, right? And then as this tool became better, people were able to make better apps. Right? Okay, we're gonna go back, look at it like that. Okay, so deleting connections, I already showed you guys that, right? If we delete a connection, we need to do it over here as well as in here. Now, the interesting thing is, if I delete a connection, let's say this button, this handle button press here. If I'm gonna delete this action, I select that and I go over here and I delete the action, right? I delete it, and notice that this guy is now hollow, right? This actually will not crash. This just means there's a function here that never gets called, right? So if it's hollow, that means there's nothing connected to it. If it's full, that means there is something connected to it. And the good thing is, look at that. I think this answers your question kind of, right? If I hover over this thing, it shows me what's connected to it on the storyboard, right? So yeah, and if I want to reconnect it, I just do this again and connect it in like that. Now it's full again, okay? So when you're deleting stuff, make sure, like, I would say like 8 times out of 10, student is like, hey, my thing is crashing when they're doing like, you know, the storyboard stuff. I come over and look at, okay, it's nil, found nil unwrapping optional. Let me take a look at something that you didn't delete, right? So, okay, so that is for that. I'm gonna show you guys real quick how to make Git, right? So I'm gonna commit this thing to my GitHub. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to my GitHub, create a new repository, and we're gonna call it May 10 lecture. Okay, I'm gonna create this repository, and now I have this stuff, right? But what I really want is this one. Copy this link to the clipboard, right? Copied. Now I go back to Xcode. I'm gonna stop the simulator. Over here we have source control. You're gonna hover over your folder here, and then you're gonna go to configure, and then you're gonna go to remotes, add a remote. You're gonna paste in the address. You're gonna add this remote. You're gonna do done, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna go back to source control and you're gonna commit, right? And I'm gonna type in my first commit, and also check this out. If I check this box here, push to remote, as soon as I commit it, it's gonna push it to my remote, right? So it's gonna ask me, you know, and then I think the password is this. Yeah, I think I put in the right password. So it's preparing to push. It's going to do all that. And if I go over here and refresh the page, boom, it's there. Right? So it's really, really easy for you to integrate Git into any Xcode project. In fact, if you go to my GitHub, I think, if you see the little timeline thingy, this is where I started to do iOS. Everything's lighting up here because before then, this was the summer of last year, and then I started iOS in August, and then I started committing a bunch of stuff, right? Because it's so easy to do it with Xcode. All right. Let's see. I'm gonna give you guys this link. Just gonna put it here. All right, so you can have the code, and that's it. So the goal for today, Cold Call V2, right? It's on the board up there. We're gonna have the demo at 2 for the deck of cards. Tomorrow, the goal is Tipster. So basically, finish up everything in iOS Beginner. Friday is Hackathon. If you're behind on Friday, you can catch up. If you're not behind, then we'll regroup and we'll do the hackathon. All right, cool. Any questions? Let me show you guys. You have
Oh
questions?
yeah, I was just wondering, how difficult is it to, obviously, because when someone has a website, they usually build a website before they build an app. How difficult is it to integrate what you've built on, like let's say a website using Python, into what you're doing with iOS?
It's not difficult at all. You're just using the backend as an API,
Oh, okay.
right? So you're gonna have to build your app out from scratch.
Yeah.
But the data that gets fed into the app is from your backend that you already made.
Oh.
So it's the same. You don't need to build another backend for it.
So would it
Maybe
be
you need to
better-
build some other routes.
Right. Would it be better to usually build a website first then, like so that you can just put all of that information put it all in there, then rather than trying to do it all
Yeah.
in here?
I mean, typically speaking, you want to have a website to enter info,
Yeah.
right? Because that's what I did with the Algo app. I have a web interface that lets me enter stuff, and then I have the app that displays it.
Is this app gonna help us with algorithms?
It is. It is.
When's it gonna be released?
Let me show you. All right, let me show you guys. So I've been working on it, here and there. Let's close this guy. And I've been working on this one. So here is the API. I'm gonna run this first. I'm gonna do sudo mongod. All right, and then I'm gonna run nodemon. So the server is up and running.
This all mean?
Yeah, and check this out. If I go to localhost 9000, I have my little content management thing where I have all of these tracks, right? And I'm gonna enter this later on when I deploy it. Right now it's not deployed, it's on my local host. So this is kind of like it's like dummy data or like, testing data. So I have these are all of the tracks for your algorithms. Each one, I'm gonna put every algo in here, right? And I can do that, via my little interface over here. And I can edit things.
So you're using the admin side
Yeah,
of it?
so I'm the only person who can enter this,
Yeah.
right? So this is the web, right, for me to enter in content. Now that's not interesting. What's interesting is this guy. So I'm building this app, and look at this. Look at how many view controllers I got. All of these custom classes, custom cells, protocols, and then if you look at the storyboard, let me just get rid of all this stuff. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff here. So you got your login. This is the initial view controller, right? The arrow, root view controller. It's gonna log you in, or if it's you're cached, it'll log you in automatically. And then I'm using the app delegate to transition to this guy. And then it'll load up the menu, and then it'll load up your tracks, all of this. This is your profile. I've been working on this page the past couple days, and then the leaderboard I'm gonna probably work on sometime later this week. Settings page. So if I run this, I think it might work. I've been testing on my phone a lot. The thing with the simulator is that you can't take images on the simulator. So for a photo app, usually you need hardware to do it, right?
You need hardware. What does that mean?
Meaning you need to connect it to your phone.
Oh, okay.
So I'm gonna try to run this on the iPhone 7 Plus or simulator just to show you guys. See if this works. It should work. I mean, there's no reason why it shouldn't. I'm gonna have to, if I log into my account. Then okay, see, this is a more lengthy, it's a bigger project, so it takes a lot longer to run. While it's running though, let me show you my awesome code documentation. See, look at that. So it's a profile page here, or this one. There's a lot of code, right? You can make it yellow with 3 slashes, and each of these guys I have this mark, but I have these things on top as well to make it easier for me to see it, right? And if I look at, okay, here we go. I need to log in. Yay, there we go. See, we have all of our algos, and I spent like the break just making all these icons for each of the algos. So there's a progression. Notice that in the beginning when we showed you guys the website, there was only 5 of them in the first one and 3 of them in the second one. All right, so if I click on any one of these, it's going to show me the algorithms. If I click on it, it'll show me the algorithms, which ones are completed. If it's completed, it'll go and fetch the images. Look at that, the loading screen I made over the break. So you got all their images. It's actually getting these from S3, from the cloud. So it's all saved. It's like a little, it's basically as if Instagram had a baby with the algo book. This is what you'll get, right? So you can click on the image and then you can like, you know, you can maximize it and scroll through it. But
Why is there an image?
Yeah.
what?
Like, why do you have images there for algos?
Because it's for people to take pictures of their algorithms after they're done.
Oh.
That's the idea, to keep track of everything, right?
Instagram.
Yeah.
Insta,
So in order for you to complete an algo, you need to take a picture of it, right? There's no camera, so I'm gonna hack it. So if I hack it, it shows up HackerMan. That actually worked. That's the first time I tested that. So yeah, like if you already have photos there, you can add another one, hack it again. There you go, right? And you show you when you took it, when you completed the algorithm. This is what the algorithm is. You scroll down, there's like a little hint, right? It shows you, you know, when you've completed this algorithm. And all of this is like saved in the back end. It's all connected to the cloud. And, you know, it's working pretty well, right?
Awesome. And are you going to show us how to connect things to the cloud as well?
Well, that I actually just learned last month. So that is like way more advanced than the scope of what this course is. But I mean, I can definitely show you the tutorial I followed. So
Yeah,
you know,
that'd be
you'll be able to learn on your own.
How about streaming?
This is not streaming stuff. So over here you have your settings, and this actually saves every photo you take to your camera roll, to an Algos album. You make it. It's a new album that gets created called Algos. Everything goes in there, and you can disable that if you toggle this one. You can also log out. You have a profile, which is total algos completed over the total amount of algos that are in here. Right now there's only 8 because I'm testing, right? And this will show you the progression of the percentage of all of the algos you've done. Over here there's like a little achievements thing that kind of scrolls, and I still need to work on this.
So who grades the pictures?
Nobody. It's just for you to keep track.
So
Right. Yeah. So, and here I just, you know, you can edit your stuff. So if I say it like that, you know, it changed. Right. Leaderboard, there's nothing on here yet, but I want to have like so everybody has this progression of the percentages of algos they've done. So leaderboard, which is have everybody and then ranked based on, you know, so anybody, not even the people who are like third stackers would be on here. So you'll see like who's the top.
Really?
Right. And then in the future, I can add in like, you can maybe enter in your cohort like special code, and you'll all join one room, and it'll be like Instagram, so you can scroll, and then you'll see the latest ones that people have taken, so that you don't need to take their photo. You can just look at this for their photo, right? So, yeah. But it's like I'm almost there. I've been working on this for a while. Hopefully, Michael Choi will allow me to deploy this. Because the algos are probably proprietary or something. So maybe I'll have like a special like secret password for people to log in for Coding Dojo students. You know.
what about when we graduate?
Yeah, I mean you'll still get it. Once you're
We're
in,
alumni.
then once you're in, you get to create an account.
Okay.
If you don't create an account, then you can't log in, right? So, yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. This is a ton of stuff. I also made another app that is this word app here, and this is the one that's really, this is the first app I've made, and it's deployed, it's on the App Store, but if you look at the storyboard, it's in contrast to the one that in the algos. Literally, there's just this one scene, and everything you do is in this one scene. So if we run this,
So it's kind of like different templates.
Oh.
Like comparing it to Python or something, it's like you're going to another HTML page when you have a different thing for a storyboard. rather than having all the logic be done on
Yeah.
this one.
So if you have a different scene, you can make another custom view controller to put your code in there instead of jamming it on one view controller. But for this one, this dictionary app that I made, I felt that it made more sense to have everything on one page for continuity. But it ended up just like, and I'll show you guys the code later, but there's like a million lines of code. So this is actually this app here. You can download it on the App Store. So you can search, it's kind of loading up. You can search for a word. It goes and grabs the real definition, and then it goes and grabs the Urban Dictionary definition. All right. If you click on it, it'll actually, yeah, it'll say it. You can also you can also get a random one. It's rolling the dice.
Oh my
So we got, all of the histories that you did.
Oh wow.
Something new that I did was if you hold on to it, you can delete it. Look at that. You can also delete all of it if you want. You can click on your history stuff to see it.
That's so cool.
This one doesn't have Urban Dictionary MP3, so there's no little sound icon next to it. But if I click on it, Siri will just read it for me. I'm not going to do that because it's too loud. But you can also go to the hardware and do the shake gesture, and it's as if you shook it, and it's giving you a random word out. Right. So if you look at the history and you do the shake gesture, the new thing will come up on top. Right. So that's all the history, and the R stands for you got it randomly. And if you want to search it for manually, you just do it here. Right. So this is pretty hilarious. I've been actually using it a lot, like just day to day. But the code for it is insane. If you look at, go to the very top, or if I can get this. So you see, I have a bunch of different, different external frameworks I'm using. All of these are variables. All of these are outlets. All of these are outlets. These are all actions. Handling stuff pressed. Right here we got our history stuff going on. We got our API, new hotness API. I used like a pretty bad one in the beginning. Then I upgraded it to a paid one. So this is the new hotness. Right, this one will get me the word.api, the white ones, and then this one will give me the Urban Dictionary ones. This one will give me like the synonyms and the similarly spelled words like that. And then this is, I'm not even halfway through it. Right, this is the view, this is some Facebook stuff, and then it goes down, down,
How
down.
did you animate the different parts of it? Because I saw that, you had your thing that kind of came out smoothly, and some of them were rounded.
You do animations programmatically in your code, and I'll show you guys how to do animations maybe tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, tomorrow I think we'll do animations. And then, yeah, look at that. All of that table view stuff goes down. It ends up to be like 3,300 lines of code, right? All in one view controller. So it's like, this is very important for you to navigate through things now, right? Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, go download my app. It's if you search my name on the App Store, you'll find it.
What's it called again?
All right, I'm closing this.